Well, hello, everyone out there. I am Gal Beckerman. I'm an editor at the New York Times Book Review, and I'm thrilled to be your moderator today for this, what should be a really fascinating conversation about Beba Epstein, The Extraordinary Life of an Ordinary Girl, which is an interactive exhibition that YIVO has created that really tells what I think is a fascinating story of one girl's experience in one girl's pre-war experience. And it's an opportunity, I think, for those of you who have actually looked at it or will look at it, to really see the kinds of things that can happen in terms of online exhibition, and the ways that a personal story can open up an entire world. We're going to talk a lot more about it, and I just, what we'll do here basically is I want to introduce our panelists, and then I'm going to give each of them some time to speak and give us some more information. And then we're going to have a conversation, and then there'll be about 10 minutes of questions after that. So I will, let's get started with letting you know who's with us here today. We have Antony Polonsky, who's an emeritus professor of Holocaust studies at Brandeis University and the chief historian of the Museum of the History of Polish Jews in Warsaw. We have Michael Leventhal, who's Beba Epstein's son. He's a lawyer specializing in providing corporate intellectual property and business transactional services for media and entertainment and technology companies, as well as general businesses. He's represented hundreds of startups and every type of client, from individuals to Fortune 500 companies. Then we have, of course, Jonathan Brent, who's the executive director of the YIVO Institute for Jewish Research in New York City. From 1991 to 2009, he was also the editorial director of and associate director of Yale Press. And he's now working on a biography of Isaac Babel, the Soviet Jewish writer, and teaches history and literature at Bard College. We also have Karolina Ziulkoski, who is a new media artist and designer who helped work on creating the online exhibit. She holds a master's degree from the Interactive Telecommunications program at NYU and bachelor's degree in architecture and advertising. And she is currently the chief curator of the YIVO Bruce and Francesca Cernia Slovin online museum. So with that, let's get started. I thought maybe Jonathan could kick things off. If each of you could just sort of speak for a few minutes about your own particular perspective on this incredible project.
Thank you, Gal. Welcome to everybody. Many of you will know what the YIVO Institute for Jewish Research is, but not everybody. And so I'd like to spend a minute or two talking about the history of YIVO, because the history of YIVO is to a great extent involved in so much of what we do at YIVO, and particularly in the creation of this online museum. YIVO was founded in 1925 in what was then Vilna, Poland, now Vilnius, Lithuania, the capital of Lithuania. It was founded with the intention of becoming a higher academy for the Jewish people of Eastern Europe, something that had not existed up to that time. That is to say, for the study of the history, the folklore, the politics, the religion, the music, the literature of the Jews of Eastern Europe, where Jews had lived for almost 1,000 years. In order to undertake this study, however, the leaders of YIVO very quickly realized they needed primary materials. Where were they going to get them? Nothing had been collected. There had been the Ansky expedition of 1912, but there wasn't a great deal more than that was collected in a repository where people could actually go and study it. So YIVO started an international collectors campaign. They started a campaign of what were called Sammlers, collectors, all over the world. There were mini YIVO outposts in New York City, in Brazil, in Argentina, in London, in Paris, in Berlin. There was a major center of YIVO in Warsaw. there were YIVO outposts in Chicago. You can imagine my astonishment when in Vilnius, Lithuania, we come upon a poster of a performance of a Yiddish a play that my father used to tell me about, that he had seen in the Douglas Park Yiddish Theater in Chicago, Illinois. And somehow this poster of exactly that performance was in the materials that we were looking at in Vilnius, because these Zommlers from all over the world sent everything to Vilnius. There they were kept. When the Nazis invaded in 1941, they had already known of the riches of the Jewish institution YIVO. And they had decided, instead of burning it to the ground, rather to appropriate a great deal of the material, take it back to Germany, and with it help to build the foundation of the Institute for the Study of the Jewish People that was going to take place in Frankfurt, and also in Prague for the Museum of the Extinct People. And so YIVO's materials would be part of that enterprise, that Nazi enterprise. However, other parts of YIVO's archive and library were saved in Vilna and hidden in the ghetto. And so YIVO's holdings were torn in half. Literally, we have found the first part of a document in New York City, the second part of the document of which currently exists in Vilnius. It was literally taken apart. And so indeed, the Passover story of the Afikomen really does apply to this material. The material that was sent to Germany by the Nazis was discovered after the war by the US Army in a warehouse outside of Frankfurt at Offenbach, Germany. And this material was sent to YIVO that had reestablished itself in New York City. The material that was in Vilnius, however, remained hidden. It had been, first of all, hidden from the Nazis, and then after the war, it was found, much of it, found and put into a museum of the new Jewish Museum of Vilnius, which in 1948, the Soviets wanted to destroy. And they were intent on pulping all of the material. And it was, at that point, the Jewish leaders fled, and it was completely unprotected. And at that point, a Lithuanian librarian, Antanas Ulpis, rescued it. He had no idea what he was going to do with these materials. All he knew was that these materials should not be destroyed. And he hid them in a church, and he hid them in other institutions in Vilnius. YIVO in 2014 began a project to reunite what was in Lithuania with what is in New York, not physically, but digitally. And so we started the Edward Blank YIVO Vilna Collections Project. And we have up to now digitized millions of documents, hundreds and hundreds, millions of pages of books of all kinds, reuniting digitally these two collections. In 1917, however, a new discovery was made of approximately 200,000 pages of materials in the National Library of Lithuania. And among these, that was brought to my attention, was the diary of Beba Epstein that had been found intact and in almost pristine condition. And so we brought it to the United States. The New York Times was very interested in this. They photographed it. They put it on the cover of their online article about the YIVO project. We thought Beba Epstein had died in the Holocaust, and the next day, I believe Michael Leventhal called me and said, I'm Beba's son, and this was quite a shock to everyone, and a very happy one. Nevertheless, these materials that we have put online are in Polish, Yiddish, Hebrew, Russian, German, in many languages, and 18th century Polish or 19th century handwritten Yiddish, of which, as many of you undoubtedly know, there are numerous dialectical differences from one region to another and so forth. Therefore, everything we have put, all of this rich, this treasure, this incredible treasure house of Jewish material that we are putting online is really only accessible to experts, to scholars, to people who can read these languages and understand the context of it. And so it occurred to me that in order to make this material truly accessible to the Jewish people worldwide, throughout the United States, but also in China, in South America, in Russia, everywhere, we had to translate the material into English. And so from that point on, it occurred to me, obviously we can't translate everything. It's far too expensive, and there are a lot of things one might not wish to translate. So the idea was that scholars would select materials of particular importance, particular interest. We would translate those, maybe 200 or 300 such documents per exhibition. And we would put this online so that people could have access to the riches of the YIVO Institute around the world. Karolina will go into our thinking behind why we began with the Beba Epstein autobiography. But today, YIVO has 24 million documents and some 400,000 volumes. We are the greatest repository of, coherent repository of material about East European Jewish life anywhere in the world. And the last point I want to make is that the materials that we have are unique in the following sense. There are institutions that are devoted to the Holocaust, or institutions devoted to religious studies, or institutions devoted to political events, but YIVO has all of it. Our collections range from the rarest manuscripts of 18th century rabbis to a unique, as far as I know, collection of Yiddish pornography. We have materials from all over the world. We have musical theater. We have high art. And we also have shund material. We have Yiddish vaudeville. We have jokes. And we also have Sholem Aleichem. We have the autobiography of Mark Chagall, the testimony of Shalom Schwarzbard, letters by Gorky, letters by Tolstoy, letters of Thomas Mann and Erich Fromm. It is a wonderland. And I truly invite everyone who is part of this program to come and visit and explore the richness of this extraordinary institution.
Thank you, Jonathan. So Karolina, can you take us into the world of this online exhibit? You know, what does it mean to put something like this together?
Yeah, absolutely. Before I start anything, I just want to thank the panelists for taking part in this event, and also everyone who is attending the program today. I'm going to start talking a little bit of our reasoning behind the development of the exhibition and why we decided to go with this narrative approach for the online museum. And The first thing that we started by thinking when developing this project is understanding what defines an online museum, because we are used to seeing digital presence of museums all over as an extension of a physical institution. And but here we have a museum that exists only online. So when that's the case, do the same principles apply as when you have a physical exhibition? And then it led us to rethinking the concept of an online museum. So we started by asking ourselves some questions, and some of the most relevant ones were, how can the behavior of users in digital environments be used to make digital exhibitions more engaging? And what works well online? So from the answers to these questions emerged the framework of this online museum. So what we are doing here is taking advantage of a medium that is ideal for storytelling and for a multiplicity of interactive experiences. And we base the exhibition on narratives about a journey. So our first exhibition is about the journey of Beba Epstein. And these stories are then told through a combination of different archival objects, written text, animations, videos, interactive 3D environments, and more. So as Jonathan was saying, it's not only about translating documents, but also understanding the context in which they were created and the world, what was happening in the world at that moment. And there's a lot more to be discussed regarding the concept of an online museum, so I'll leave that for our discussion portion of the evening, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the actual exhibition. So as previously mentioned by Jonathan, the first exhibition focuses on the life of Beba, and she went through the Holocaust and was the only person in her immediate family to survive. And as Jonathan also said, the exhibition draws from her autobiography, which was written in 1933 and rediscovered in Lithuania in 2017, and explains to her whole life from there. So we developed this exhibition for the general audience, but also as a tool for education, especially to teach about the Holocaust, prejudice, and hate. And we think Beba's story is ideal for this because when we were reading the autobiography, what really caught our attention is how much her life was so similar to that of many children today. So she was very close to her family. She loved going to school. She talked about her struggles while learning. She went to summer holidays in resort towns, and she went to summer camps. She studied in a bilingual school, which is something that I know a lot of kids in the United States and all over the world can relate to. And yet, due to prejudice and hate, her entire life, as she knew it, was destroyed. So what we worked towards here was to always make the connection between her life and the historical context around her, and how they influenced and had some very real consequences in her life. So we use the micro perspective of the story of this person to teach about macro subjects, using storytelling as the main tool to achieve this. And for those who are attending the program and who have not had a chance to check out the exhibition, I'm just going to do a very short tour so that you know how this works. So I'm just going to share my screen here. Oh, sorry, I think I need to be allowed to screen share, Jane and Alex.
Try again now.
Thank you. All right, so let me do, there we go. So here, this is the first page of the exhibition. This is the first chapter. So the storyline of the exhibition is divided into chapters, and each one of them focuses on a specific topic. So you can follow the whole story from beginning to end, or explore individual chapters, because all of them are full stories in and of themselves. And this here is a table of contents, which we can access by clicking here, that shows everything we have available. We show her life before, during, and after the Holocaust. And as you can see from here, the first 6 chapters are focused on her pre-war life. And we really want to focus on everything that was happening back then. And then each chapter, this is chapter 2, it's just an example, contains several layers of information that allow you to explore the content in greater depth. So in this chapter, Beba is presenting her family, and we use this as an opportunity to talk about all the changes that were happening between the mid-1800s and the early 1900s in Jewish communities. So the main content is Beba's story as told by her. What we did in this specific chapter was adapt her account of her both grandparents from both sides, parents and siblings, into animations. And this is her story as told by her. And then on the left side here, we always have a timeline that shows the main historical events that were happening at the time to tie her story into the bigger historical context, as I was saying. And then we have these historical context boxes, which offer further information about the context of the time. So in her account, she mentions topics that might not be known by everyone, so explain those in a bit more detail. We use her testimony as a segue to learn about broader issues. And from here, whenever possible, we also connect to resources to learn even more deeply about a subject. So some of the links are going to take you to the YIVO Encyclopedia and other content from YIVO, like classes and past programs. So the idea of this structure is to mimic the rabbit hole that we have all fallen into online at some point, going deeper and deeper and deeper in a subject. But here we make sure that everything is coming from trusted sources. And finally, we have a selection of maps and artifacts. So here we have documents, videos, photographs, objects, songs, even handwritten notes that expand the main topic of that specific chapter. So some are going to relate to Beba's story specifically. We happen to have several family letters beyond her autobiography and other personal documents that we used in research, while others are going to deal with the general topic discussed in the section. And we always include a scholar essay for each one of them to expand on the subjects being presented. And here, as I said, we also have a map section to situate you where you are, especially because there were so many border changes happening at the time in the area. And the users can explore the content of the exhibition at their own pace. So you can pick and choose specific parts to go through, or you can go through the whole exhibition from beginning to end. So as I said, this is a very short introduction, and there's a lot to be explored, and I'm looking forward to having a deeper discussion about the exhibition here. Thank you.
Thank you, Karolina. Why don't we turn to Antony, to hear a little bit about, a scholar who sort of reviewed this project and how you see its usefulness.
Yes, thank you very much, Jonathan, Karolina, ladies and gentlemen. I was very glad to be asked to comment on the Beba Epstein project. One of the problems which historians face is how to bring our work to a larger public. Jews have a well-established communal memory of the history of their antecedents in Eastern Europe. On the one hand, this long history is remembered as a golden age of piety and communal harmony. On the other, what is recalled is continuous persecution and anti-Jewish violence, culminating in the mass murder of the Jews in the Holocaust, to which the local populations were for the most part indifferent, and a significant number assisted the Nazi murderers, while a small group attempted to aid the Jews, something which was savagely persecuted by the murderers. These two views are clearly difficult to reconcile, and one of the tasks of the historian is to create a synthesis which will correct both the overly sentimental and also the excessively negative view of this past. What we need to do is to explain the importance of the history of Jews in Eastern Europe and to show how much was achieved by the Jews of this region on the path to the modern world. Even more difficult is how to communicate this understanding to a wider audience. As Jonathan eloquently set out, this is the goal of YIVO, certainly one of its main goals. And the Beba Epstein exhibition is, in my view, an imaginative and innovative attempt to reach this larger public and to explain these issues to a broader audience. The 19th century writer Thomas Carlyle observed, "The history of the world is but the biography of great men," a view which reflected his obsession with great men. A better way of understanding the past is to see it in terms of the biographies of individual men and women, great and not so great. And this is the approach of the Beba Epstein project. It takes as its starting point an autobiography written by the 11-year-old Beba Epstein for one of the 3 competitions organized by the Youth Research Division, Jugendforschung, of YIVO, then based in Vilna, in which young Jews were asked to submit their autobiographies. There were 3 such competitions, in 1932, in 1934, and in 1939, to which over 600 autobiographies were submitted, of which about 300 to 350 were recovered after the war. They're the subject of a scholarly study by Jeff Chandler, Awakening Lives, Autobiographies of Jewish Life, of Jewish Youth in Poland Before the Holocaust. Beba Epstein's came to light in 2017 among the thousands of long-lost manuscripts, as Jonathan again described, which were then rediscovered at the Martynas Mažvydas National Library of Lithuania during the course of the Edward Blank YIVO Vilna online collections project. Beba, whose son is with us today, and this is a moving connection with the story, came from a secular Jewish family, although as is burgess from the material, her grandfather was still quite religious. She was a student at Yiddish language primary and secondary schools in Vilna. They are bilingual only in that Polish was one of the languages taught there, but all other instruction was carried out in Yiddish, and was the only member of her immediate family to survive World War II. She managed to escape from the ghetto and was hidden on the Aryan side. She subsequently emigrated to the United States with the help of her uncle, Lazar Epstein, a prominent Bundist, whose papers are in the YIVO archives. Another uncle, Israel Epstein, became a celebrated journalist in China and one of the few residents of non-Chinese origin to join the Communist Party, played an important role in the history of Chinese communism. In this moving and very accessible exhibition, and you'll already have seen through Karolina's presentation how the exhibition is set up, Beba's life is recounted and situated in the complex story of Jewish Vilna, the Jerusalem of Lithuania. Among the topics which are discussed are Beba's family background, set against the sweeping social, political, and economic changes which took place in Eastern Europe from the end of the 18th century, Beba's school experience, the way her family spent the summer, and her own experiences in summer camps, which of course were a feature of the Jewish Eastern European youth movements as they were in the United States. I should say in parenthesis, I was never allowed by my parents to go to summer camp. They thought very bad things happened there, which I should not participate in. The exhibition goes on to describe her high school education at a time of economic crisis and worsening anti-Semitism, how she survived the Holocaust, and her emigration to the United States, where she married a Jew from Mexico. A significant part of the exhibition is devoted to the depiction of Vilna in the 1930s, and it helps us to understand what made it such a special center of Jewish life. According to the Polish census of 1931, of the approximately 195 people who lived in the town, perhaps 55,000 were Jewish. The overwhelming majority spoke Yiddish, a language to which they were devoted. There was a story told that in Krakow, when Jews spoke to each other in Yiddish and somebody came along, they apologized for not speaking in Polish. In Vilna, when they spoke in Polish and somebody came along, they apologized for not speaking in Yiddish. There was also a small number of acculturated Jews who spoke Polish, but also spoke Russian. Again, my grandparents were part of the Russian-speaking minority, some who lived for some of their lives in Vilna. In the online tour of the city, which Karolina introduced you to, we explore the area, a number of areas. We explore the area around YIVO's headquarters in the town, that around the Sofia Gurevich Primary School, which Beba attended, which was sponsored by the Jewish Labor Alliance, the Jewish General Labor Alliance, the Bund, and which used Yiddish as its language of instruction. We're then shown some of the cinemas and theaters in the town and the high school which Beba attended, the Realgymnasium, that is a technical high school, in German a Techniker Hochschule, where the language of instruction was also Yiddish. We were also given virtual tours of the Vilna Great Synagogue, which survived the war but was unfortunately destroyed in the first years of Soviet rule, and the Schulhof, which surrounded it. The large Strashun Library, one of the great glories of the Jewish Vilna, and the market area, which is used to describe the different occupations which Jews engaged in. Particularly moving is the evocation of the Zakrent, a forest area in Vilna, or just outside Vilna, along the Vilja River, one of the two rivers. The other was the Nereus, which flowed through the town. The name comes from bend, in Polish, Zakrent, a bend in the Vilja River, which was a popular place for walks and picnics for Vilna inhabitants generally, but particularly for Jews. This electronic recreation of pre-war Vilna is a tour de force, and I cannot recommend it too highly. I spent a lot of time when I was sent this material going through it, and it constantly throws up new treasures. This is the first of the online presentations of the Bruce and Francesca Cernia Slovin Online Museum, whose mission it is to bring the history and culture of East European Jewry to a broad general audience, along with access to YIVO's rich archival and library collections. It's a great achievement, and I very much look forward to the discussion which it will stimulate both tonight and in the future, and also to the subsequent presentations which it will sponsor, which will continue the focus of this exhibition on the lived experience of individuals. It was, again, Benjamin Disraeli who said, only read biography, for that is history without theory. And this is certainly history without theory. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now, last but not least, Michael, to tell us a bit about what it means to have your family be at the center of this kind of project.
So, two things to know about my mother, Beba Epstein. She was a Vilner. She loved Vilna, the city of her birth and childhood, and she was an immigrant. Nitta her, nitta hin, as she might have said, a proud American, but Vilner to her soul. My mother and father passed in 2012 within 7 weeks of each other. On my mother's side, because of the Holocaust, the family is very small. So when they passed, the flow of information from the older generation to the younger ones stopped. Whatever questions we had failed to ask, that was it. There was no one to ask, no new information to be had, or so we thought. One day in the fall of 2017, my sister Mary contacted me. She'd gotten an email from a good friend of my mother, a lovely woman, a Yiddish lover and scholar named Sarah Moskowitz. Sarah's grandson, who was living in New York, had seen an article in the New York Times about a treasure trove of documents discovered in the basement of a church in Vilna, now known as Vilnius, and forwarded it to Sarah. The article contained information about many aspects of the discovery, but one stood out. It was the collection of autobiographies from young kids throughout Lithuania and Poland, commissioned by YIVO in 1933. There were hundreds of these autobiographies discovered in the cache of documents, and the Times decided to run a photo of one of them in the article. Sarah forwarded the article to my sister, who contacted me. When we saw the photo, we knew it was our mother. At an age none of us had ever seen. She was 11. We had a photo of her as an infant, one where she was probably about 4 to 5 years old, and because of the loss of family and artifacts due to the Holocaust, the next photos we had of my mother, or had ever seen, were from a 23 to 24-year-old Beba Epstein. Still, we knew it was her immediately. And suddenly, there was new information, new stories, new histories, new photos, new revelations. A well-written, insightful, articulate story from a bright young girl, my mother, writing about her life with her parents, her siblings, none of whom we'd ever met. Another thing to know about my mother, her own self-image to the contrary, she was a survivor. And in a way, she had always been an ambassador to the Vilna of her youth. A city of 100 synagogues, a vibrant Jewish culture, publishing companies, artists, musicians, poets, commerce, beautiful nature. On her gravestone, we wrote in Yiddish, Tochter from Vilna, daughter of Vilna. Even though it was impossible to forget her, she felt forgotten and not noticed. She believed, wrongly, that no one cared about the Holocaust, that no one was interested in her story. The idea that now, and for future generations, my mother could be your guide as you discover and navigate pre-war Vilna and the 500-year-old Jewish culture that ceased to exist in just 4 years. The idea that my mother could introduce you to her life, her experiences, her city, well, I think she would be proud. I think she'd be beyond proud. It's poetic in a way. Beba Leventhal is still a survivor and still an ambassador. And it's not just an important historical artifact. The backdrop of the story my mother tells and the story Karolina, her team, the museum, and the archives so beautifully tell is one of creeping fascism. My mother and everyone in Vilna lived in the darkening shadow of Nazi Germany and the fascist movements that were growing throughout Europe. Experience what she experienced, and you will see it yourself. You might recognize a bit of it in what's happening here in the US right now. Do not be fooled, my mother would undoubtedly say. It can happen here. Pay attention. Another story emerges from the later part of the wonderful YIVO exhibit, my mother's challenges in emigrating to the United States. First of all, somewhere in the YIVO archives, I believe there is a letter from the early mid-1930s from my grandfather to a brother of his in the United States asking for help in emigration. That letter went unresponded to. The family, as you've heard, other than my mother, did not make it out. Even my mother, after the war, had difficulty coming to America. It was only through the heroic efforts of my great uncle, Lazar Epstein, that she was able to make the voyage to New York. By the way, in the exhibit, you can see what she saw from the ship she was on as it entered the New York harbor. It's a magnificent photo. The warning for today is when the world closes its doors to the persecuted, suffering happens, sometimes on a grand scale. Let us not continue to make that mistake. My mother might say, thank you all for showing up, for caring about a little girl from Vilna and about her vanished world. Come inside and take a look around. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Michael. It's easy to see sort of the power of having one family story and connection to that world and to the Holocaust and to the pre-war world, what it means to have it at the center of this kind of exhibition, because it's your story too. It's your family story. It's not just something that we're all taking in as an audience. So I guess what I wanted to start with, and this is a question really that I could open it up. I think any one of you could probably chime in on this, but I'm very fascinated with how you take pieces of archival material and turn them into a narrative and the challenges of doing that. I mean, what seems the brilliance of this particular exhibit is the way that you've done it, the way that you've done it so well that it's accessible, even to children who would want to, who would come on, who I presumably are one of the main audiences for this. So talk to me about that challenge. How do you take, when you open up an archive, and I've done that sort of work, so I understand you're finding these discrete pieces of information, a letter here. I mean, in this case, we have the autobiography at the center of it all, but there's so much more here. A letter here, a map there, another piece of text. How are you finding a way to turn that into a narrative, not lose what's essential in terms of the information that each of these pieces of archival material is conveying, but also not get bogged down with too much information, which I imagine is the other side of the extreme. So I know that I can imagine Karolina might have something to say about this, and Antony would too, from another perspective. Yeah. Go ahead.
You're muted.
Oh, sorry, Antony, I think you're muted.
Antony.
Yeah, Karolina, you speak first. I'll comment after.
Yeah, sure. So this first exhibition, Beba's Story, we really took as a guide Beba's autobiography. So when I read it, as I said before, as I was going before on my initial statement, what really caught my attention was how much her life was similar to that of children today, irrespective of their faith or their background. And I really wanted to use it because we've always had the intention of this being an exhibition that would have a bigger focus on younger audiences. And from there, I identified some themes. And then we also watched Beba's testimony that she gave to the Los Angeles Holocaust Testimonies Project with the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. And I identified more important parts in there. And then from there, we had the main topics, and then we laid out the main structure of the narrative, really. And from there, we started going into the archives. And then we realized, well, we have the archives of her primary school, the Sofia Gurevich School. We have the archives of her high school, the Real Gymnasium. And then we started gathering information. And then we realized that we had the archives of Lazar Epstein as well. And in there, and I'm so grateful to Lazar for keeping everything, really, because there were so many letters from the family that wrote to him before the war, from Beba's family. So we have letters from Beba, we have from her parents, and there's just so much information in there that really connects to her autobiography and the stories she tells in the autobiography. But also, and talking here, something that Michael brought up, her immigration story. And then we found the papers from her immigration story. And I had watched her talking about her process of immigrating to the United States in the video, in her testimony, but then being able to see her denial letter from the American legation in Stockholm, because in case you guys have not gone through the exhibition and the immigration chapter, she's first denied. And then we see his attempts at finding someone to be the person who is going to be in charge of her in case she didn't have money to support herself in the United States. So that all made it all so much more tangible. So it's just that the documents that we have in the archives, they all made the story tangible, because it's one thing when people tell you things and then you can imagine, well, maybe this person is older now, maybe they forgot a little detail. But when you get the actual documents and see how reliable that story is, it makes it so tangible. And then from there, really, I think it was very easy to just go into the archives and find everything connected to the main topic of the chapter. And because this narrative structure was always very clear that we are going to have her story and then from there connect to bigger topics, it was really, YIVO has just so many treasures in the archives that it wasn't hard to find documents in the archive that really are part of what she's talking about. So when she's talking about her mother going to a very good school for girls that she learned in Hebrew, and then you go and research about that time and you learn that just a generation before, the generation of Beba's grandparents, most women were even illiterate. They wouldn't even know how to read and write in Yiddish. And then you go in there so fast to the generation of her mom when she has such a good education. And then it's very easy to connect to the Haskalah and go into this broader topic. So it was always a matter of identifying Beba's narrative. Okay, so now she's talking about this and this connect to this bigger part in history. So I think it happened very seamlessly, and we are very fortunate how seamlessly it happened throughout the development of the narrative.
Antony, did you want to say something too about this?
I wasn't involved in the organization and setting up of this exhibit, but I was involved in the same process at the museum in Warsaw. And what's very important, I think, is for there to be a synergy between the professional historians and the designers, the people like Karolina, because a history book, has 400 pages and lots of footnotes. A museum exhibit or an online exhibit can only have a very small amount, even when you have links to articles. So it's a question of making use of the material which is available, and there is a lot available. There are several scholarly works on the history of Jewish Vilna, or history of Vilna generally. There's also the YIVO Encyclopedia, which Jonathan had a major part in producing, and which is, of course, available online, which makes it much easier to access. It's a question of relating the scholarly world to the world of the museum professionals. And there was an added challenge here in that this was not a normal museum, but an online museum. I would just add that one feature of this exhibition is that there are a series of scholarly essays written by experts in the field Beba and her family in Vilna, resorts and summer activities, Beba in school, Beba in summer camp, Beba in high school, Beba's experiences during the Holocaust, Beba's immigration to the US, and the fact that she married a Jew from Mexico. There's even an article by Ilan Stavans, one of the great experts on Jews in Latin America, on Jewish immigration to Latin America. So a lot is covered. And what's good about this is that with electronic tools, and we've learned a lot during the pandemic about these tools, but we were already using them extensively in the museum in Warsaw, and this is just another use of them. With these electronic tools, you can provide access to scholarly material while at the same time summarizing the material and presenting it in a visual manner, which makes it more readily accessible to the larger audience, and in this case also a younger audience, which we very much hope will be attracted by this. I would just say in conclusion that these autobiographies are remarkable, and there are a lot of them, 600. I presume now most of the 300 to 350 which had previously been got to the United States will be supplemented with the additional ones. They describe a generation in transition, a generation which is experiencing a drastic historical change, and which, as Michael movingly portrayed, could see the rise of fascism and the threat which this posed to them, both as individuals and as Jews. And they are very moving, and I very strongly recommend Jeff Chandler's discussion of these issues, which gives an insight into them. But I'm very glad that one, and this is a very moving one, the Beba Epstein one, was used as the basis of an exhibition, because they cry out for this use.
And I just want to add just one thing. Also, one thing that I have to note is that there is actually a lot of content in there. And I wrote the whole thing, and I was surprised to know when we were sending materials for translation that the whole exhibition amounts to, including audio materials, videos, everything amounts to 250 pages. So this is something that is really interesting, because you could never put this amount of material in a physical exhibition, but online, because you have several strategies to do this using design, essentially, that you can hide some information here, some there, some on the other place. And you don't really need to go through everything if you know it already, but if you don't, there are several opportunities for you to learn more. But it doesn't feel like you're going through so many pages. You don't realize that there's just so much content in there, but it's just as much as you want to discover, really.
As a consumer, I'd just like to add, I was given this material to evaluate. This was a hard task, because I found myself spending an enormous amount of time on it, because there was so much that I wanted to look at.
Fantastic. So I just want to remind the audience that you can ask questions if you click on the Q&A icon at the bottom. A question for Jonathan and Michael. I'm curious what it was like to have this kind of project be so centered around one family, and how you work together, both as an institute and as, and Michael, in terms of your family, sort of finding the common ground in terms of how your mother's story was going to be presented, and how YIVO wanted to present her story. So if you could talk a little bit about that relationship.
Sure. Not much to say. It's really easy. I got to know the folks at YIVO a bit, and by the way, YIVO was an organization that my mother loved, and gave money to every year, all of this. So this was not an unknown organization to me at all. And I did know that my great uncle Lazar's archive was there. I suppose if we had kind of a different agenda, or different ideas of how best to portray her and to kind of utilize the autobiography, it might have been challenging. But basically what happened was we talked about it. We realized we were very much in alignment. I loved what they were doing. They consulted with me on a regular basis to make sure that I was up to date on what they were doing, and I kind of let them go and do their thing, and the result is pretty wonderful.
I wasn't sure if Jonathan had anything else to add to that.
You're muted, Jonathan.
You're muted, Jonathan.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah,
Yes.
that's good.
For me, first of all, let me say that the original idea of the museum did not begin with taking individual lives and exploring Jewish history through that medium. This was something that Karolina brought. And at first suggested. And at first I was not certain this was the right way to go with this material precisely because there is so much. And how can you get into politics and religion and social life and recreation, all of these different things. And then it just naturally became evident that it was precisely through a single person's life that all of these materials are unified. And not only unified, but given meaning. And it seemed to me that this was the one thing that is often lacking in historical treatments that show this event was followed by this event was followed by this event, and we look at the causes for why these great historical events are taking place and the narrative and so on and so forth. But the inner meaning of it, the meaning for individuals, was often not there. And this meaning is what these testimonies, these autobiographies supply. And so I was actually very grateful for Karolina's suggestion, and I think she did a brilliant job in this first exhibition in accomplishing just that. How the unifying of all of these different materials, the unifying of the growth of fascism on the one hand, and the story of I Believe on the other, by Ziulkoski. To me, that's the life.
Yeah.
That's how you understand life. And YIVO is about that.
Yeah. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this exhibit was first planned pre-COVID, right? It was always going to be online. That wasn't, the online element wasn't a reaction to COVID. So in some ways it was quite prescient in that, or not in some ways, in many ways it was quite prescient because you've provided access to an exhibit in a situation where we're not able to all be together in physical space. And I'm just curious, sort of as a last question, and then we're going to turn to some of the questions in the Q&A and people's questions. How is what you've done here applicable to other Jewish and Holocaust museums? And I guess I also want to ask something maybe a little bit counterintuitive or challenging, which is there something that's lost when people can't see the physical material themselves? I remember recently reading about the creation of sort of holograms of survivors to tell stories from the Holocaust, which on the one hand is an absolutely necessary thing, just like this is a necessary thing, because in that case, they're not going to be alive anymore. And so, we want that slightly more personal connection, but there also seems something quite sad about it, and a loss. And so I wonder just how you balance those two feelings, those two impulses, to bring people together with the physical material, but also to reach them where they're at. And then, how we can think about this and how we can think about ways to apply what you've done here to other institutions that are struggling with these same questions.
Could I just kind of begin? And I want to go back to what you were saying originally, Gal, about the fact that this was conceived before COVID. It was indeed conceived before COVID because YIVO's obligation is to reconnect people of Ashkenazi heritage all over the world. Just look at the the composition of the audience for this program, from Canada, from Lithuania, from Austria, from Israel, from all over the United States. How can any one brick and mortar institution reach everyone? And after the Holocaust, with the complete disruption of Jewish life, of real significant and profound disconnection from our roots that took place as a consequence of that, the Jewish people of Ashkenazi descent around the world are in danger of losing their most precious thing, which is their heritage, which is the understanding of how they came to be, who they are. And so it was always an impulse since from the time that I became executive director of YIVO to find a way of connecting with a world public. And fortunately, the technology caught up with the desire. And so as soon as it became apparent that this was something we could do, we started pursuing it. And then Karolina came along.
Yes, I agree 100% with Jonathan. And I just want to say that the thing is that there's always something that is lost. Doesn't matter what you're doing, you always have to choose. It's part of an editorial process when doing projects anywhere. And when you do an exhibition online, you do lose something. You can't, for example, you can see the scale of an object. It's hard to see many objects one next to the other. But there are limitations for in-person exhibitions as well. I mean, you certainly cannot have the amount of historical context that we have available in this exhibition, because there's no way that you can have so much text or that you can have so much audio features. You can't even, I mean, some people don't even, very few people get audio features in museums. So it's really, everything has limitations. And instead of looking at what we were losing, we decided to look, what are we gaining from it? What can we do here that is going to be very effective? And this is how this all came about. So online, you have the opportunity to have more text. People can come, they can watch the exhibition, they can see it, they can come back later. They are now walking around tired. They are now making the exhibition kind of like a date or an entertainment option. So there are always things that you're getting here. And the way I like to look at this is that they are different media. So when you have an in-person exhibition, it's a media. When you have online, it's another one. It's like thinking of a book and a movie adaptation of a book. You wouldn't just, can you imagine if someone just started narrating the whole environments that Tolkien, that are set forth in Lord of the Rings, for example? It would be so boring, because you can have a moving image and you can see that environment in front of you. You don't have to, you don't need someone describing it. And I feel this is the same thing here. Let's look at what we can do effective online and what is going to be great here. And let's just take it and go with it. And I'm always an optimist. And this is how I choose to look at things. You know, let's just look at the bright side. Even my husband said the other day, it must be amazing to live inside your head, because you're always looking at the bright side of situations. But it's really how I like to look at things. Instead of looking at what is being lost, let's look at what we are getting and how we can make it better and how we can make it effective. Because in the end, it's about, you know, you can boil it down to what it is that you're trying to achieve. Whether it's an in-person exhibition or an online exhibition, there is always a learning outcome. There's always something that you want people to come out from there knowing that they didn't know before. And it's just a matter of thinking how you can get to that point more effectively.
Thank you, Karolina. Let me go to some of the questions, because I think we only have a few more minutes. There is one, somebody wants to understand again what the Soviet Union did with the Vilna collection. Maybe that's a question for Jonathan. I think you covered some of this, but in the beginning.
But it was too brief. In 1948, Joseph Stalin initiated what was called the anti-cosmopolitan, which was really code word for anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic campaign in the Soviet Union. And orders went out to all of the associated republics, Poland and Czechoslovakia and Lithuania, that a Jewish culture, traditional Jewish culture, was to be suppressed, if not completely eliminated. And so the Jewish Museum in Vilnius, into which all of these uncovered materials had been put by Avram Sutzkever and Shmerke Kaczerginski, this was dissolved. And then they took it a step further, and they literally were going to pulp these materials and to destroy the teaching of Jewish culture, Yiddish language, all of it. It was a very important part of Stalin's post-war strategy. And so it was only because of the heroic efforts of this Lithuanian librarian, Antanas Ulpis, that these materials were saved at all. They would have been destroyed. Stalin was going to finish what Hitler had started.
A question from Jora Oren. Would you recommend schools go online to see the exhibit? And more specifically, and I'm curious about this too, as the father of two young elementary school kids, from what age? Like, do you have in mind an age that you think this is appropriate for?
Yes, absolutely. We actually, we have teaching resources for teachers, and we are working on several webinars with other institutions to train teachers about these materials. But it's really, Holocaust education is really all over the place in the United States and in the world. Some places start very small, some places wait until students are older. And being online, we can't really control who's coming into this and who's coming to take a look. In the parts that are more sensitive for younger audiences, we put a warning. So when you go into the Holocaust chapter, there's a warning for if you're a parent or if you're a caregiver going with through this with a child, to say that it might not be appropriate for children younger than 9. However, here in New York State, Holocaust education starts very young, actually. Some teachers started when kids are in 3rd grade, although the majority happens at a middle-age school and a high school level. So what we did is we made guides for elementary, middle, and high school with different activities depending on their level. And what we advise teachers to do is, if you're teaching a very young audience, instead of letting them do this by themselves, that you do this with the children. Either if you're teaching online, you can share your screen, or if you are in the classroom, you can use a smart board. And for older audiences, for middle and high school, then teachers can encourage students to go and check the materials by themselves. But I think the bigger effort are in the middle and high school levels for teachers to use this.
I'm curious, Karolina, have you gotten responses yet from students who've used it, or from teachers? Like what kind of, how are they taking in the exhibit?
It's actually, we did have some feedback, and we know of schools that are already using it. The thing is that we need them to come to us, because we can see in our analytics, well, there is a lot of access coming from Google Classroom, but we can't do the privacy issues. Of course, we can go and talk to them. So some teachers and some schools have come back to us and gave us some light into what they are doing. But it's what I find really interesting is that every teacher does it a little bit differently. And I think that's what we were looking for. We want teachers to take the materials and to use it however fits their classroom and their teaching objectives better. And so far, the response has been great, really. They're being very creative and using it in different classes. There are specifically Jewish studies classes that are using this. There are classes that are from public schools, for example. Some are using it specifically to teach about the Holocaust, but we always make sure since we have so many sections, there are different subjects that they can use the materials for. And so many, we receive responses of teachers using this to discuss different cultures with their students, for example, or how Beba's life compared to yours, and talk a little bit about different issues that are happening nowadays, which was always something that we hoped would happen.
If I could add, I have just recently heard from the Sholem Aleichem School in Australia, in Melbourne, Australia, where the teachers presented a small portion of the museum to their students, and then they just let the students make use of it however they wanted to. In other words, the student didn't guide, the teachers didn't guide the students through it. The students just sort of wandered through the exhibit on their own, and these are middle school kids. And the response was of the teachers was just amazement at how interested the students were and how avidly they made use of the materials. But it's being also used in England, in South Africa.
I'll just do one more question, and then I think we're going to have to wrap it up. Do we have, Olga asks, do we have a gap as far as Jewish personal stories from the end of the 20th century until current times? I don't know if there's somebody who feels equipped to answer that, but maybe I'll tack on my own question, which is, is there any organization like YIVO who's doing this kind of almost sociological work to understand the life of the Jewish people and its various permutations throughout the world? Because presumably the archives of YIVO end during the war. Or no. Well, there you go.
Archives go to the present day.
They do. Okay.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. And we have many post-war materials, but Antony, maybe you could answer this question better than I could in terms of what other institutions may be doing, or how Jewish experience after the war has been a subject of some academic interest.
You're muted, Antony.
No, a lot has been done on this, and I mean, a lot has also been collected. The Jewish Historical Institute has a large archive, including something like 6,000 testimonies collected immediately after the war. There's an audiovisual department at the Polin Museum, which is collecting material. I think that the Moscow Jewish Museum and the Takuma Museum in Dnipropetrovsk in Ukraine are also doing a lot. And I'm sure that there are some of the other institutions in America. The National Museum of American Jewish History is almost certainly doing something like this. And those of you who have been following the Grabowski-Engelking libel action will know that the documents, or the document on which Barbara Engelking based her account of Estera Drogitska's experiences during the war are in the Spielberg archive in California, which is a very important archive, as is the Fortunov archive. I have to say that these documents are actually very important, even though they were recorded much later. And the claim by the judge in this case that because, or at least the lawyers for the plaintiffs, that these documents should be discounted because they were recorded 50 years after the events is not to be accepted.
One more practical question, and then we really will say goodbye. Has the exhibit been translated into other languages, such as French? One of our viewers asks. I don't know if Karolina or Jonathan can take that.
Yet into French, the Lithuanian government is contemplating translating the whole of it into Lithuanian for use in Lithuanian schools.
No, yeah, this is definitely something that we would love to see happening. And it was something that we built in development when we were developing the exhibition. When we were building the tools, we were always thinking that there is a very good chance that this is going to be translated into other languages. So it was something that we always had in mind, and something that we really hope is going to happen with as many languages as possible.
Great. Well, thank you.
Antony.
Oh, Antony, yes.
Well, I mean, one of the things which I found very moving was Michael Leventhal's presentation. And I wonder whether there's any intention to add to the exhibition some responses from the Leventhal Epstein families.
Well, there is, I have to put the plug in for my son. There is, I know Karolina knew I was going there. There, at the end of the exhibition, there is a poem that my son wrote, and my son is he's about to get his master's in creative writing poetry. And he writes a beautiful contemplation on his experience of encountering the autobiography and comparing it to what he knew about his mother, his grandmother rather, and so there's already that, and as for what the future plans are,
I think it would be, I mean, I don't know whether this is feasible, but it would be very good to have something on this, because it's a link that was both broken but recreated, and it's sort of miraculous, almost supernatural, that you should have seen the photograph of your mother in the New York Times. I mean, I find that hard to
it is miraculous. That's how we feel about it.
I'm particularly pleased with the Times' role in making that connection happen, for what it's worth.
New York Times.
Yeah. What a great note to end on. So thank you, all of you, all four of you, for just a really fascinating conversation, each with your own perspective on this exhibit, which if anyone has not had a chance to explore it, it is really worth your time. I think we put a link in the chat for anyone who needs to access it. Still, thank you all for your time and your stories.
Thank you everyone.
Everyone for watching.
Yeah.
All right.